Hi there, everyone. I hope you're keeping well and welcome to today's Engage Employee webinar. I'm Kathy Brown, today's guest host. As you're settling in, do please let us know what's top of mind for you right now in terms of your internal comms. You should be able to see a poll on the screen right now. But before we start properly, I want to remind our audience at home to ask your questions today using the chat function on your screens. We'll aim to answer all of the questions that we can as they come up. But if we can't do that, we do assure you that any questions we don't get around to answering will be answered after the event. I'm really delighted to be joined today by Nicola Crowley, who is the Head of Internal Communication at Home Group, by Edward Thomas, the Director for Communications, Marketing and Public Affairs at the Housing Plus Group, and Matthew Burgess, the Director of Customer Experience at Work Networks. And we are exploring today the role of internal communications in enabling frontline colleagues to deliver on the organisation's purpose, and how in turn we connect that to driving measurable business impact. Across many sectors, particularly in housing, it can't just be about keeping people updated. It has to help people feel connected, informed, and able to do their jobs well. And I personally have an original background in a customer service centre for a large telecoms organisation, and this subject resonates so personally with me in terms of how important it is to help frontline colleagues engage in this way and feel connected to the organisation's purpose. We're going to dig into three particular themes that are connected around this. We're going to start by exploring what frontline workers actually need from internal comms, rather than what we often assume that they need. We're going to move into how we cut out the noise for people and deliver personalised, targeted messages that are actually useful and relevant. And then we're going to look at that perhaps much harder task of linking communications and engagement to business outcomes, things like retention, culture and service delivery. So in our top of the mind poll right now, we can see that we've actually got a really interesting spread of people very evenly across our options. So acknowledging that we've got a struggle to engage frontline or deskless teams, making comms less noisy, how we refresh our digital comms platform and intranet. We can get very used to the tools that we use, and how do we make sure that we're doing that to the best of our ability. That knotty problem of linking comms to business impact, and people attending to hear what other people are doing. And we're going to touch on all of those points throughout today. So I think we're going to have a good coverage for you. So as we kick off with our first theme, which is understanding the front line, we can bring up another poll for you. We're going to do a fair few polls today. It's a really good way of both engaging yourselves in what we're doing, and obviously in understanding what actually is out there and what's going on. So one of the most important things about this is, what do we think as a set of professionals would deliver a significant difference for your employees and your frontline workers? So you can see that poll is up there now. And Nicola, if I may, I'm going to come to you and just ask you about those particular options that are on there and what are particularly relevant for you and your organisation.
Absolutely. I think for us, a lot of this resonates. And I think that first poll about connecting with frontline and deskless workers, it's a huge challenge for us. And our business is changing and evolving as we go as well. We are bringing in more and more deskless workers. So it is a very timely thing. So I definitely resonate with some of the options in the polls. I think what we've been doing at Home Group to try and really understand our audiences a lot more. So rather than looking at that broadcast option, it's really trying to start to understand who needs what and how they work differently. So at Home Group, we look at the broader colleague experience and all of the elements that make that up. But actually, we've got a tendency to talk about all of those things as well and to kind of fire hose people with all of that information. So there's a lot going on. I did prepare a little slide, which I can move to in a timely manner. I think, which is this. So we use this at Home Group to kind of help us keep on track with our colleague experience. And obviously different things matter to different people at different times of their careers, at different positions they are, at different ages in life. etc., etc. So it is really important that we share all of this information, but it's how we balance that and how we make sure that it's targeted and relevant and personal to people as well. So trying not to tell everybody everything all the time is a key thing, I think.
I think definitely. Edward, does that echo at Housing Plus?
It certainly does, and I think it's much more about being kind of a feeling of connection rather than just bombarding kind of information. I think there's when we talk about frontline and talk about different kind of sections of the workforce, I think it's quite interesting just to think about that, put a slightly different lens on it, and think just to say frontline workers. And you know, we've talked a little bit already, or referenced already, about really understanding the audience, but it's think about different types of frontline workers. You know, as a housing association providing repairs and maintenance, care services and things like that, I might be a care worker, a particular age. I might have, you're talking about, you know, a baby boomer and a Gen Zer. They want to consume their information a different way anyway, even though they're all frontline workers. So I think that's also something that we're really thinking about. And I think there's the fire hosing, and really thinking about how that works in relation to push and pull information. So I think traditionally as communicators, we've just gone, let's just get the message out there and then everyone will know. But actually it's making information available when people need it, when people want it, if they want it. But everyone is consuming the same information. So if that kind of makes sense. And I think how that then pins back to what we're trying to set up as a culture of the organisation. So Housing Plus groups being created off the back of a merger that took place at the beginning of this year. So we are right in the middle of establishing, you know, what is our culture. One of the key merger aims is to be a great place to work, but you know, bluntly, what does that even mean? We've got 2,000 members of staff, 2,000 colleagues, and we'll have 2,000 definitions right now. So we're learning all about that, learning about the audience, and that's, you know, that's really important to all of us at the moment.
I think that leads really nicely, Matthew, into you obviously at Work Networks, you've got a view over a number of organisations. And I can see that coming out from our poll, feeling part of the bigger picture is considered to be a really significant difference for many organisations. So do you find that organisations are actually mapping those internal audiences, or even reflecting on the complexity of the workforce? Or is that something that is perhaps lacking at the moment?
Well, this is an interesting question, I think, especially when it comes to feeling part of something. So at Work Networks, we see things in terms of three connections. We think you need three connections to flourish at work. One is the connection to the people that you work with. The second is the connection to information, resources and tools, stuff you need to do your job. And the third connection, which is maybe the most elusive, is connection to the whole of which you are a part.
Yes.
And that can be your team, it can be a project group, or it can be the organization as a whole. And we work in the organization-wide space. You know, we work primarily with org-wide technology. Enterprise social networks was the unfashionable name for them. I still like intranets, all the kind of things where you're trying to connect people at scale. And we find that, you know, people use the fire hosing term here, that actually, and if you think about, if you just refresh that slightly, if you think about connection to the water supply, which all our houses are connected to the water supply, but what makes that useful for us is taps. Otherwise, we'd be flooded all the time. So I think that what we're doing, you know, when we work with organizations, and it's interesting working with both Housing Plus and Home Group here, is that we look at the taps. We really look at, and Shannon made a great point in the chat there about the way they want to be communicated with, that actually communication at scale is easy now because of connection tools. And actually, we need to go a step beyond that now and make it relevant and make it useful. You know, we always come back to usefulness as our kind of watchword here. And I think what's interesting just for all of you out there on this session is that we work with a lot of housing sector orgs, and we really find that, and we've worked with Workplace from Meta for a long time, and I've got benchmarks and data on all the organizations that we work with. I really like digging into this stuff. And what we've seen with both Home Group and Housing Plus is that they have consistently high metrics when it comes to weekly active users on their platforms. Now, these platforms, again, they exist to connect the whole organization. They're not so much day-to-day work. And both Nick's and Ed's orgs have over 80% of weekly active users, which means that people are getting a consistent value from that connection to the organization. And that's why I think housing orgs are a really interesting kind of bellwether for how to bring an organization that has a bunch of different frontline populations and a bunch of back office populations, none of which are in the same place at once, and make that work as a whole thing. And that's why I'm really interested to dig further into this with Ed and Nick today.
Absolutely. Just before I move us on to our next topic, and I mean, we're all very conscious that we're covering a huge amount of material today. Nick and Ed, can I just ask you both for a really quick, what have you learnt about what really matters to your frontline colleagues when it comes to this?
I'm happy to go. I think we are a people organisation. We work with people to deliver people outcomes, and actually having that kind of people lens on everything that we do is super important to us. And actually, it's those stories that connect people. Actually, connecting people to the business outcomes makes a huge difference. And I think when it's a bit tokenistic to say, but when people care about what they do, they work harder and they do better. And actually helping people to care about what they do is part of our job. So telling that story about the impact of the organisation and making sure that people feel connected with the social purpose. We're fortunate enough to have a really strong social purpose, and I know it's the same at Housing Plus too, where those stories are easy to come by and they are people-focused stories. So I think that is, like Matthew says, that connection to a higher purpose is a real bonus for us as internal communicators to tap into. To use the tap analogy again, sorry, Matthew.
So I mean that's really interesting to hear, and I could echo a lot of that. I think what's also interesting is by providing a platform for our internal communication, very easy way for us to get messages out, but it's also a platform that enables kind of peer-to-peer connections and creating a community. And actually, some of the most popular content is not the latest corporate update that my team have been able to polish up and it looks lovely, but actually it's just where someone's given a shout out because maybe someone in the contact center has just taken a call. The customer said, thank you very much to, the guy or the girl who's just, come and done a repair in their house. And actually that's the stuff that people love. Peer-to-peer recognition and creating that sense of community and connection. That's by far and away the most routinely popular content. As much as it slightly grieves me to say the stuff that we create as a team comes second, but that's the way of the world.
If I can just chip in on that one, sorry too, Kathy. One of the things that we do is, that probably my favourite part of the job is spending time away from the desk and out on the ground, and worked with another housing org, Peabody, in London, and went out for a day with some of their staff, spoke to their supervisors, and the supervisor was really frustrated that he had this amazing electronic communications device in his pocket. And yet when he was out on his rounds and residents were asking him what was the things that were happening to the estate, he wanted to be able to pull out his phone and give them the answer. And the answers were there. They just weren't clearly, we're working on their system now, clearly available to him. And so that's, I think, what we're looking at. It's often local first over global. So actually your point was right, Ed, the stuff that's more relevant to you right there and then is miles more important than whatever your CEO is saying, unless what your CEO is saying is directly relevant to that person. And also how to deliver it. And this is, again, a key area where we're working, and I've seen your teams, both Nick and Ed, working on the same thing, is how do you deliver maximum clarity per pixel? Here, do we junk images? How do we make our headlines do what they're saying on the tin? How do we really focus in on that communication so when someone pulls the phone out of their pocket, they can have what they need? And those are the that's the work that we are really focusing in on at the moment.
And I think that's a beautiful segue into our next theme, Matthew, which is so our second theme, designing for relevance, cutting that noise that just gets in the way of us being able to do our job and targeting what matters. And you can see that we've got our third poll coming up, what causes the most noise in your internal comms right now. And this absolutely impacts that way we deliver, how we deliver, because we've worked, we've understood the needs, we've perhaps hopefully understood what motivates and drives our workforce and makes them feel as one. So this is where we tackle the how. How do we target? How do we personalize? How do we use the right platforms and strategies? So we've got various things popping up now in that poll as we go through. Matthew, you'd obviously just started touching on that. So do you want to give us a little bit more about what that means in terms of how we deliver?
Yeah, and so if you come back to the kind of water analogy kind of thing, that back in the day when social networks were a benign thing and that it was better than email, so people adopted it in the workplace around 2017, 2018, that everything came into a feed, and that feed was not of sufficiently high volume to be overwhelming. So it was, again, the water was a nourishing thing rather than the flooding thing. But now that it's a channel and it's easy to create comms on a channel, and as everyone knows, when it's easy to make stuff, more stuff happens. So what we tend to do, again, that we work on it from like three areas. One is the details, the very fine details of the post and the communication types and how they land. And again, this is something that comms teams have got a good instinct for often, and sometimes it's just allowing that instinct to go free, and so again, just focusing on the writtenness almost in a way, and then going back from that it's governance and structure. These words which are they fell out of favor for a little while, especially when user generated content became big, and it's just easier to say, go and set your own thing up, but actually whenever you're dealing with large audiences, the larger the audience, the more structured the communication should be, and the more governance should be in place, because again, you've really got to deliver value. When I work with users, we often think about it in terms of 3 flicks. You've got 3 flicks and if in those 3 flicks there's nothing relevant to you on the feed, then your vision of the platform as usefulness goes down a notch. And eventually, if it goes down too far, it's like, that's not useful to me, I'm not going to log in again. So again, fortunately, the post-workplace generation of platforms, which I'm talking about WorkVivo specifically, and Blink and Flip and platforms like that, actually have a lot more capability than Workplace did at being able to target your comms specifically into groups and to auto-populate audiences so that you can deliver specific audience comms. And at the same time, what they also do is make it a lot easier to have a fixed place for comms, because actually I'm finding emails and intranets are coming back into favor now, because I think people were getting so bothered by the volume of fast moving things that's coming in via Slack or coming in via your social networks, or that it's not fixed, it falls off the bottom of the screen. And so having a fixed home, and intranets work really well for that, and the WorkVivo homepage works well for that, means that if I don't know anything, I know that when I come to this fixed place, I will have lots of paths. So again, it goes back to information architecture and intranet design.
It does. And I mean, we've got a phenomenal list from people answering the poll that covers many, many of those things. There's a lack of clarity, verbose overlong updates, spamming from the center, and the volume of communication. Ed, what were the specific challenges that you experienced around this sort of noise and irrelevance in Housing Plus?
Yeah, so I think this new generation of kind of enterprise social networks, we're using WorkVivo. They're fantastic from the point of view that they're digital, everyone can access them. It also means, and particularly we've geared it up so we just take the shackles away and basically anyone can do anything anywhere. That creates a lot of noise. However, it also enables you to personalize what music you like. So actually, if that kind of information is just not very important to you, switch it off. So you're bespoking your own experience, as well as we can pull the levers to segment the audience in a particular way. So you should only see information that's relevant to you. And if you're not, actually, there are ways of opting out. And so we're at the point in our journey now, we launched about 10 weeks ago, where we've kind of done our activation. We've got a few people to still get on, but we're largely there. So now it's about really refining how all of this works in terms of the segmentation and reminding people that they can switch stuff on, and hints and tips, and taking people on a journey about how to use the platform, because the point that Matt just made, we want people to come back because we are sharing information that is important, and people do need to consume it. It's then setting that broader kind of ecosystem around it that has other things that are interesting to people. So the peer-to-peer stuff, but also more social things. I was looking this morning, there's a gardening group, people are sharing stories about photos of their tomatoes and things. And that's what people really want, replacing the water cooler moment, to coin a phrase from a few years ago. Then that's, that's what pulls people in to then get work information as well as social information.
Definitely. And Nick, do you how have you approached personalisation at Home Group? Similar or different? Or
yeah, I think we launched Workplace back in 2017, and it really led to quite a significant shift in the way that we consumed information at Home Group. Previously, like a lot of the comments, there was hundreds and hundreds of emails on everything from parking to bake sales to who's in the office today kind of thing, and they just circulated a lot. And what we found in the first year of launching Workplace, we actually sent as an organisation 17 million less emails just in the course of a year, from having a place where that place was able to be consumed as a pull maneuver rather than a push maneuver. So I think we've learned over the last 8 years or so to consume differently at Home Group. But what that's meant is that we have to do a lot of online as well as offline. So we kind of signpost between the two. So what we tend to do offline, like posters, handbooks, etc., tends to signpost back online. So we find that one of the biggest challenges we've got is the volume of information that is there for people to consume, and how we help them cut through that and find what they need. And WorkVivo has been super helpful because, as Matthew said, it helps us categorize things into spaces that are quite easily accessible and easily findable. But we have an intranet which doesn't always meet those same levers, shall we say, and sometimes that means that we have to really point people to very specific policies or bits of information, and we do that through QR codes on posters or through QR codes in a handbook. And then we use WorkVivo to really help manage that consistent flow of conversation. So that's where people go to be part of the organisation on a daily basis. And then there's static content that we have to actually really drive them to find, which is challenging. So
yeah, and of course,
you've
got an element, haven't you, of there's always going to be information that people on the front line have got to have and be aware of, whether it's for legal or regulatory reasons or whatever else it is. And they need to have that one of our attendees has just pointed out about having it, in a timely fashion. And you can't necessarily leave that with the individual person to do that in their own time. It's got to be done to the needs of the company in that way.
The amount of time wasted in finding information means that productivity is reduced. So the more that we can meet people where they are with what they need to do their jobs, that's kind of our aim in internal comms, is really to help people do their jobs more effectively and productively. And as a result, we managed to squeeze some messages in about connection and purpose and values and mission and et cetera, et cetera.
So I know that all three of you felt very strongly that the third of our themes, the measurable impact on business outcomes, was particularly key, and where we would like to sort of spend some time and see what we can generate again from our attendees in terms of their experience. So we have another poll, of course, and that poll is: how confident are you that your internal comms is delivering measurable impact on business outcomes? And this really you know, we've understood our audience, we hope. We've looked at our delivery and finessed that to the degree that we can, but we need to show that it's working on those things that we count as important as a business. And that might be culture, it might be retention, it might be the way that we onboard people, it might be the productivity levels that we see. I mean, every organisation obviously will be different in terms of that impact. And so then say we've got our poll is up, if you can have a look at that. And let me just have a look.
I think, can I just make a quick point about the last point before we go leave it? Because Shannon made a really interesting point in the chat, making sure that managers of messages are filtering through to those that really need the info, like line managers. And I think there's a really important point to make here, that the way that you deal with people, I know that for us, anyway, that line managers are a special audience, especially valuable audience. We do lots of work with Workplace on finding, we can really trace the data for line managers teams and how you can see engaged line managers teams and their effects carrying across the platform. So I think that line managers especially, they need to be almost, dare I say, given special treatment. I'm really a fan of these platforms being used to get line managers info from senior leaders before other people get it. Line managers have got to be fully equipped, and often they can get left behind by these platforms because when you have staff given direct access to senior leadership, often line managers feel, you know, out of the loop. And so you've really got to work to bring managers not just into the loop, but into an inner loop there, I find. And that Shannon makes a really great point on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So our poll there around measurable impact, we can see that, in fact, we've got people with some data, we've got people tracking activity, but not necessarily impact. But by far the most common situation there is a general, we're not quite there yet in any sort of formal way. So there's clearly a lot of work yet to do, I think, in understanding that connection and that input and everything else. And I think a really important point to remember here is that actually our goal is not engagement itself, it's enabling our people to deliver on that purpose and function and mission of the organisation is the actual goal. And measuring that impact is how that we do that. So, Nick, I'm going to come back to you again. What does this look like at Home Group, this measuring of impact?
I think we work with the data that we've got, which sometimes doesn't always tell us the true story, but we're getting a lot more of it since having Workplace and particularly WorkVivo actually. And big thank you to Matthew, who is self-confessed data nerd and has actually really enhanced the level of information we're getting about our people. So Matthew shared with us some amazing information about leadership engagement at Home Group, and that really helped us sell WorkVivo into our executive team as a result, and absolutely hammer home the importance of their visibility on the platform and that shadow that they set to their leaders and managers as well, which has led to a big uptick in visibility on the platform, purely from having, it's probably a competitive thing, to be honest. Seeing where they stood in the rankings of other leaders was quite a showstopper for them, but having access to that information has really helped. And it does help us prove the value of what we do and get that investment too. So we do an audit at Home Group, an internal comms audit, to really and it's a mixture of surveys, focus groups, listening groups, one-on-one conversations, and that really helps us understand what our people are saying, and then we can react and respond to that. And sometimes in the absence of data, it is that conversation that leads, the mass conversation that leads to change and leads us to be able to prove what we're doing. So I think for us, having that kind of data set has helped us really do that. And one of the measures that we've had that's been very impactful, we use a Great Place to Work like Ed does at Housing Plus as a measure of engagement with our colleagues. And what we've managed to prove is a direct correlation between better Great Place to Work scores and more activity on our enterprise social network, whether that was Workplace or whether it's WorkVivo. The more that leaders are engaged, the more their teams are engaged, and that in turn has led, we've been able to correlate that directly with Great Place to Work scores. So that's been really helpful measurement for us and helped us to prove the value of our online communications too.
Yeah, Ed, is that similar? I mean, have you had to make that case to your senior leadership by trying to demonstrate some of that impact connection and the measurement?
Yeah, I think, and so we just like Nick and Home Group, we progressed from Workplace into WorkVivo, and so we've got we created ways using those analytics and other kind of listening tools and surveys, and basically repeating what Nick's just said, to create that. What is the health of that kind of online internal communication ecosystem, and then really having the confidence to use that just as a barometer for the whole organization, if that kind of makes sense, and that's where we are now. But it's using the tools and metrics inside the platform, as well as other ways of engaging and listening. And we were talking, and I think what's really interesting is thinking we've got this great platform, but actually we use other ways to communicate as well. So traditional cascade and asking line managers, when you have a team meeting, can you share this message please, is still a really important way of doing, verbalizing the message, and even putting posters up. So we launched WorkVivo in early July. Well, how do we tell people about a digital platform? Well, what we did is we made some posters, and low tech way of telling people about a high tech solution, which is actually just amusing to me. But I think kind of resonates as well. So I echo, and I listened to what Nick said, and it's to a fairly great extent, it's kind of copy paste, and just having that broader listening. I mean, I think the other thing whenever I go into a kind of let's talk about measurement is sometimes your gut instinct is also really important in things like this. We have quite a big focus on video and live video, but for some parts of the front line, that's actually really difficult. If you're not using Wi-Fi and you're using, we're in Shropshire and Staffordshire, and a lot of our properties in fairly rural areas. So the signal is you can't stream live video. So what we're now doing is we've identified that, and actually we're just going to strip the audio, and there'll be a podcast, and it'll just be much easier and more accessible for people. So, but some of that's more anecdotal, and it's that broader listening rather than the metrics in the platform. It's a whole suite of information you need to use to learn.
And I think there's a real technique in taking that data, that information, and then using that to successfully tell the story of the organisation, which is a point, again, that's coming through in the chat, is great listening, fab. What do we then do with it to bring that together? So Matthew, what do you do with organisations to facilitate that?
Yeah, this is one of the things we do most, actually. And part of it is, I think that all of you as comms people, as said, will have instincts, we'll have radar, we'll have antennae for what's going on. And I think the great thing about these org-wide connection platforms is that they allow you to extend your antennae. So actually, by giving you batches of data which you can combine together to say, oh, I thought that, and the data kind of bears it out. Now, the great thing here, or the thing I always counsel people on, is that you're not looking for peer-reviewed absolute certainty. You are just looking to decrease your uncertainty. So we have a bunch of metrics that we use. Number one of those is weekly active users as a percentage of monthly active users, because you need a critical mass of people to be in this in the platforms that you have in order for that platform to demonstrate usefulness. And that is usefulness for the organization and also usefulness for the behavior patterns. And because these platforms are conversational and quick, then actually what you can do, over the course of time, is to pick up on all the smaller signals and aggregate them together. And in doing that, that's where the really interesting pictures emerge. So, if you dig down a bit further, I always like to look at post to comment ratios and post to reaction ratios. I think comments and reactions drive engagement more than posts because they are responsive and voluntary. and being voluntary is the key part of engagement. It's your decision to lean in. I think I like Gallup describe engagement as enthusiasm, your voluntary enthusiasm for your work sometimes, which is, which can go up and down, obviously, can't it? But I really like the post to comment ratios and post to reaction ratios. And then when you drill down further, it's looking at the individual kind of populations there. So when I've done reports for both Home Group and for Housing Plus, and it's really amazing to see how certain managers, their teams, having really high post to comment ratios or post to reaction ratios, and then I go to Nick and Ed and say, oh, look at this, and they're like, oh yeah, these I could have guessed that, because these are the ones who lean into our cultural initiatives, and these are the ones whose teams are scoring highly in our surveys. So it's really interesting to see how these things come together. And if anyone out there, by the way, I can't see any of your faces, if any of you have still got Workplace, if you've got a Facebook Workplace that's just gone read-only, there is a very small window of opportunity between now and December to gather loads of data from it before it rolls over and you don't get a full year out of it. So please get in touch, because again, I really love spending time in this data, and I think all the time you find these little pockets of value and behavior of human beings, and I don't think you get that. You don't really get that in intranets. You can look at what people are searching for, and you can look at whether searches are successful, and you can look at what pages serve information, and you can calculate the information delivery accordingly. But it's rare to have a picture of the general kind of ebb and flow of life in the organization, and that's the bit where we use our kind of data skills and nosiness, I suppose, for want of a better word, to say, right, what does this bit mean? Does that mean something to you? Does that mean something to you? And that can be a real weight off the shoulders for comms teams, because you deliver value. You deliver value above and beyond the stuff that's in your job description, because comms is a connective function, and organizations work because they're connected. But being able to give you the details on how you do that, I've worked with a global comms team at Zurich, and they were putting loads of information globally into their global news because people were disconnected from it, and they didn't know how it was landing until I delved into their Workplace stats and saw that global news had the highest post to comment ratio of anywhere in the group, which for a news group is almost unheard of. But the Zurich people were really engaging with that content, and oddly enough, the global comms team were just putting in little amounts of content in there. So when something did land, it was because it was relevant. But yeah, I can talk about this stuff for ages. But there are metrics there. There are metrics and indicators that means that it doesn't have to be a black box for you anymore. Because one of the things I'm obsessed with is, I know comms teams deliver value. Now let's help you prove it, and hopefully get your pay rises.
Absolutely. So I think it raises a really interesting question to ask both Ed and Nick. Throughout this journey, obviously, which has been a length of time for both organisations, as you've gone through this process of understanding your audience better, understanding your delivery and doing that better, and then understanding the impact, have there been things about the behaviour of your organisation or things about your comms that have actually surprised you? I mean, exactly in that description that Matthew's just explained to us. Ed, what about you? Have there been things there you've just gone, oh, that is not what we expected?
There's definitely been examples where we've been able to kind of myth bust quite ingrained perceptions of, they don't engage. Oh, right, okay. Look in there, and like that team actually has got 100% weekly active. There's some of they're commenting. Now you can then look at what they're looking at and what's pulling them in, and it might be that actually they're just all logging in to say thank you to each other because that's the kind of team they are, or maybe they're just coming in because, I don't know, we've got some staff recognition or like some kind of incentive or a competition or something like that, and they're just all piling in to do that. Or are they coming in to see news, or is one leading to the other, which is actually the case? So we've definitely been able to kind of progress from old perceptions. And I think part of that is really about reducing the size of the ivory tower at HQ. I think we've been able to have a much more honest, maybe, conversation, particularly with some frontline teams who are like, well, why do you treat us differently? It's like, well, now we do treat you differently because we treat all kinds of different parts of the audience differently, but I can explain much more clearly about why we do that. And actually, it's to create a better experience for them so that they get it now.
And Nick, what about you?
Very similar. I think one of the key myths that we found quite surprising was that lone workers and night workers were very dispersed and not active, and actually they are some of our more active groups, as well as frontline colleagues, which is surprising. When we all, as internal comms, we thought it's really hard to connect with our frontline colleagues, and actually they are heavy users of WorkVivo. And sometimes that's led us to be, because we've had the proof of the weekly active users, as Matthew says, as the likes, the comments, the reactions, some of our leadership have said, well, not everybody's on WorkVivo. And we can say, actually, there's a critical mass on there that you're talking to. And I think it's helped create that push for leaders and managers to engage more with their team. So that was a bit of a surprise. The other really lovely surprise that we've had from WorkVivo, Workplace and still WorkVivo, is that our peer support groups and our allyship groups, so a lot around equity, diversity, inclusion and belonging, people are finding those connections and those places where they belong online. And actually it's sometimes a lot easier for people to have conversations around some tricky stuff online rather than in a big group setting. So that's been a really positive and very lovely surprise for us. And that's maintained over the last 8 years, which is also really positive. So that is partly one of our highest scores on our Great Place to Work is inclusion and sense of belonging. And I think that is heavily attributed to having those online communities. So.
Brilliant. And Matthew, in general, sort of as we start to wind up, if you could give our audience, what's their first step when they go away from today? What can they do that starts to improve this situation for them?
Okay, so one of the things that I would, just to reassure people on, actually, is that, again, the climate of the world affects how people communicate internally. Again, when social networking was benign, there was a lot more engagement, but now social networking is not benign. And so actually we are seeing less comments and less reactions, across the board. But this does not mean that value is going down. And actually, what we also look at the reach of things, and this is when you turn the volume of communication down, more it can spread more widely. And so this is, one of the main things that I would say to people if they think, oh no, people aren't liking or responding, is that a view is an active act, and so you can get a lot through that. And so, we really talk about the value of views, and again, just designing your communication for that, and not seeking response, not trying to prompt response, not trying to design for quietness rather than loudness. Again, I really think it's technology doesn't solve a problem by itself, but I think that using the technology correctly, which again is often about turning volumes down and doing less with it rather than more, but again getting some really clear structural guardrails in place, that little reset can often just be the thing that starts that ball rolling. And again, that's something that we're it's really interesting being part of all these different organizations, and seeing the data tendrils from all the platforms, seeing it working like that. There's another one more thing, I suppose, is if you calm down the flow, do up the surprise. Okay, so I love both Ed and Nick do these great in-person events that happen every year that, again, they really bring people together. It's not just for leaders to announce their messages. They really bring people together. And so I like the idea of developing little more surprising things that come out of the blue. Suddenly there is a thing that can only have happened on this platform that connects you all. And it comes out of the blue and you're not quite sure when it's going to arrive. But it's like, you know, you can come back from thinking, only at Housing Plus would they do that, or only at Home Group would they do that. And that is what builds that belonging for me.
And I think that's a really human aspect of it, isn't it? It's as internal comms professionals, I think it's the one thing that we need to hold on to, is that our audience are human people, you know, not an amorphous bunch of workers or whatever else. It's about humans. That's been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I've loved it, and I hope our audience will have done as well. I'm quite sure they will have done. But that does bring us sadly to the end of today's webinar. So if today's session has raised questions for you about your internal comms setup, whether it's fit for purpose, if you're struggling with reach, with relevance, with measurement, the team at Work Networks offer a free session to help you explore your options. And we've got a final poll. So please do, in our last couple of minutes, just have a quick fill out of that if you want to. So that's just around whether or not there's a particular topic that you'd like to have a chat with Work Networks about. They won't sales pitch to you. It's just a focused conversation to help you figure out what comes next. So let them know there, or you can obviously contact us. Materials will go out and they will arrange with you a follow-up conversation. And of course,
I'm going to just jump in there and say I'm just really interested in nattering with comms people.
You verify that.
I'm really curious to learn about your specific situations. And again, you know, you can buy stuff from us, but we aren't going to sell it to you. We're much more about, you know, I don't know, I really enjoy these sessions. So please don't hesitate to come and book a little chinwag, because whatever happens, I'll enjoy it.
Thank you, Matthew. So we do, of course, share the webinar recordings. So watch out for the link in your inbox. And before we finish, just want to thank Work Networks. I mean, it's always fun doing these. And Nick, Ed and Matthew, such engaging content. And it's a real pleasure to speak to you every time. So you at home, thank you so much for joining us. Take care, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.